Apologies for interrupting, Chair. The room seems to be on mute. We can't hear anything on Zoom.
Thank you, Elaine. I have no idea how that works, but somebody's working on that now. Can you hear now?
Yeah, all good. Thank you.
Brilliant. You missed a whole lot of good information too. My apologies. So that's the Chair's report is read, and can I just ask Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you very much, Chair. Look, I just wanted to take this opportunity. I think it's appropriate under the Chair's report to specifically mention the award that was achieved recently by the Tasman Environmental Trust. So they won the environmental category of the Nelson Chamber of Commerce Business Awards. And I just want to note that it's fantastic to see this recognition being given to the Tasman Environmental Trust. Of course, the TDC is a founding partner in setting up that trust. And what they're doing is that they're leveraging that volunteer effort across our district. They're building those really important relationships with landowners. And as a result, they're making an incredible difference to our biodiversity and our landscapes. And you know, I take my hat off to the efforts of that organisation and recognise Sky Davies as the CEO. So we should be applauding their success. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, and absolutely congratulations, and thank you for raising it. So in terms of the Chair's report, is there any other questions? Otherwise, I'll take it as read. I'll move the Chair's report is accepted. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mailing. Any other discussion? All those in favour, aye. Against, carried. Wow, that's the pressure off me now. Let's just go back for the show now. All right, it moves us to item 8.2. Mr. Drummond, the Group Manager's report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll also table my report as read, just as a little bit of background to it. My report is looking to pick up on where we've come from as a committee under the name of the Regulatory Committee, so some of the matters that are flowing through from our last meeting in November. It's also looking to pick up on some of the current issues that are signalled in the Chair's report under the newly branded Environment and Regulatory Committee, and it carries through some more recent sort of issues around the broader landscape that we're dealing with as we look into the environmental space and the regulatory space and bring those two things together. So it's intended to inform. It doesn't carry any expectations of decisions are made around it. And as I say, I table that and invite your questions.
Thank you, Kevin. So questions? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you very much through the Chair. I guess it's perhaps just as much as a comment, just Mr. Drummond, under your update on the Council's wastewater infrastructure, I know this is of particular interest to the Mapua Community Association. And so I'm just wondering, is there, I mean, you're working on a compliance summary report and monitoring and enforcement activity. What's the time frame for this actually coming back to the council? And then I guess my other question would be, will that report be available to the Mapua Community Association?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. Just in relation to the Mapua Community Association, they have been in correspondence with us regards the situation that was faced during the August event. And the concern largely arises from the fact that there were wastewater overflows. And their recommendations, they've got themselves an advisor who's of the view that other councils have dealt with this by having dedicated consents, which set the arrangements by which wastewater overflows can be authorised. The feedback that we've provided is that the framework that we're operating in doesn't provide for that ability. So our Tasman Resource Management Plan is pretty non-forgiving around these events, and therefore our attention needs to revert to the way in which the Resource Management Act provides for certain things to happen in times of effectively in times of emergency. So there's a bit of a dialogue going between us on, particular interpretations of, I guess, the legislative and policy framework. We've made ourselves available to attend their meetings at their request, but they haven't taken us up on that offer. To date, they are preferring to deal with that by way of correspondence, but we still have the open invitation to go back to them and clarify exactly why we're taking the position that we are and why we're placing such emphasis on the emergency provisions. In terms of the internal work that we're doing to try and get to the bottom of what happened and whether the Resource Management Act requires certain reports to come forward to explain what was behind such events when they happen. So it's not just a case of accepting them, it's a case of receiving a report that sets out why they occurred and also allows us to look into what is being done to avoid it happening again. So the timing of those reports becoming available is imminent, and my full expectation is that we are able to bring those forward to the next meeting of the Environment and Regulatory Committee, and in so doing, they would be publicly available documents.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Councillor Mayor.
It's probably a comment more than a question, but I would also like the Deputy Mayor to comment on this as well, and the manager. The rural conversation events that are programmed coming up, and I recall some of those conversations in the past, and they are quite difficult to hold with some of our rural community with some of the reforms that are coming. And I want to make sure that, one, we have a very experienced team and there's a mixture of staff and councillors at them, and I'll be happy to attend. But I just remember the response in the past, and they are particularly difficult conversations in some areas of our community.
Thanks, Councillor Monk. Perhaps we go to Deputy Mayor Bright and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think the challenge was more at the TMP engagement around outstanding natural landscapes and that's where these farmers are more receptive to these type of events. And so I think, and it's great that Jane's here because I have actually emailed her this morning. But I just do wonder how well we're going to publicise these for the community because they're receptive to finding this sort of information out rather than I think what Councillor Marling is referring to when we had particularly ambushed by a group of farmers from the far extensions of the district, particularly over ONLs and what's the other one? Outstanding natural features. So I think by and large, the rural community and particularly farmers should be receptive to this type. I'm just going to chat to Jane later about how we actually do that, whether it's have people speaking or they can engage one-on-one at tables or a combination of that. But yeah, just the manager might want to just answer how we're going to publicise this, obviously through our own networks, but what other external networks will we use?
Thank you for that, councillors. If I could invite Jane up just to give us a little bit of reassurance as to how we're going about communicating the fact that these opportunities are available.
Right, it's good. So we've got an engagement specialist, which was part of the TP plan, and he has drawn up a list of all of our rural publications. We're going through our rural industry groups, catchment groups, the local publications and the Murchison newsletters and what have you, our social media links, Facebook, and all our standard ways of we've got Fed Farms. So we've got a huge range of areas that we plan on getting the messaging out there. Would have hoped that we've got it fairly well covered off, and the industry groups will be specific to the area, obviously, that we're got the events at.
Thank you, Jane.
Councillors' diaries, or can we have that? So, because I know you specifically invited Tim and I, but other councillors may well be interested. So, whether that's something we could see if it's in all councillors' calendars.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure it's gone out in the Tasman update. The dates and everything are in the report, and absolutely we'll get a copy of the flyer out to everyone as well. All the councillors.
Microphone. Microphone, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, all done.
Councillor Walker, then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at page 16, which is titled Body Worn Cameras. And just wanting some clarification around item 8.21 in terms of using body cameras. And the last bullet point is about release of images. I'm just wondering, can someone clarify how those are released and whom they're released to and how people can get access to them?
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
If I could invite Adrian Humphreys up to the table, please.
If you could use a microphone, thank you.
I am softly spoken. The use of body cameras, if people wish to have copies of any images re-recorded, they can apply for them. We don't give them all images because some there will be privacy of other people, and there may be reasons as well relating to the collection of the evidence, i.e. is it for a prosecution or is it for enforcement action? Once we decide on what we're going to do with those images, if there is no reason to withhold them, we will provide them immediately. If they are to be used as part of a investigation, possibly going forward to enforcement action, once we've decided on what we're going to do with that and we don't need to withhold those images, we will provide them. So if they are withheld at all, it'll be in agreement with Section 7 of LGOIMA, which allows us to withhold images for certain reasons, some for the case of inhibiting a legislative practice, or if there's privacy of other people under the Privacy Act. So we will release them if we can release them. If anybody has them refused, we'll tell them why we've refused to release those images.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the vehicles on beaches and the Marlborough District Council bylaw, which are you able to give us more information about that and what was the driving force? I see it refers to safety and environmental damage. Was it also in relation to disturbance of birds and nesting birds?
Through the chair. So Marlborough have sort of started this discussion some time back, and yes, disturbance of birds was part of their concern, and they've navigated their way forward to the point where a bylaw is the best approach in their minds of dealing with a range of situations. And I understand that even since having the bylaw in place, they've had to go and then sophisticate it a little bit better to fine tune it. So it's not a an answer in itself to everything. It's a choice of tools. So in today's agenda, we're looking at the issue of the vehicles on beaches in line with the council request, and a broader sort of approach to say before we settle on, say, a bylaw approach, there's other options, and we just want to move through that sort of problem definition process as thoroughly as we can, because the indications are that whichever regulatory tool we land on for addressing these sorts of issues, it's not perfect. And so it's got pros and it's got cons. So Marlborough have navigated their way through it and said, well, that's the best in their eyes. We're at the beginning of that journey, and there's quite a substantive paper being prepared with quite a bit of background detail to it. You'll see it dominates most of the pages in your agenda. So there's quite a fair bit of reading there to show that there's quite a bit to consider as to how we go about best managing those different impacts.
Yeah, thank you. Just a supplementary. So is it possible for us to have a review or a report of how Marlborough actually traversed their way through the issue and what the pitfalls were and how they do compliance, what their challenges were over compliance and that sort of thing, because that could inform our decisions further on down the track.
Can I just park that perhaps, and can we park that thought and bring it back up at item 8.5 when that report's in front of us? But it's
Sure.
absolutely worthwhile. But rather than relitigate and then have the report, let's pick it up at 8.5. Other questions? Very quiet, isn't it? Councillor Rice, you must have a question. Being no further questions, is there a mover to receive the Group Manager's report? Councillor Dowler, seconded by Councillor Butler. All those in favour, aye. Against, carried. 8.3, so page 24, Mr. Smith. Rob, I learnt about a velvet worm. I've never heard about a velvet worm until I read it, and I liked the picture. And then I'm still unclear whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I know what a velvet worm now looks like. Welcome, Rob.
Kia ora. If I could indulge you a little bit right at the very start, velvet worms are very cool. You might have heard them called Pteridopus in the past. They're a link between worms and insects, and they're 500 million years old. They pretty much haven't changed since. So you'll always, and if you look in the tropics, you'll find these beautiful coloured ones. So our staff member was pretty excited to see it. So through the chair, I'll take the report as read, if that's okay. A couple of things to highlight. One off, you'll see that I mentioned summer students quite a bit through the report. We have 4 every year. This year we had 4.5. We had one from last year, came back briefly and did set up the rural hub for us, which Jane might have just been talking about. They're really valuable to us. So I just want to say thank you for allowing that process to occur. The way we do it is we, across councils, we look for people who are likely to come forward in local government. Local government seems to be not the most desirable place for young people to be looking for work. So giving them an opportunity to work here is really valuable, and we essentially use them as staff members, so we get great service. You'll see a lot of the material that I talk about is actually the external funded material from the government. So we've done incredibly well out of MPI, MFE and DOC to get external funding to do biosecurity and biodiversity related work. We have one little, nationally, MPI is reducing its funding for the Wilding Conifer next year. So we will see a drop off in service in that area. Wilding conifers, of course, particularly in the Mount Richmond Forest Park, where our effort is focused. We don't want them to get into that. It's pretty iconic habitat up there. Fortunately, we have been able to carry some money forward, so government money forward. So next year, we won't be as bad as it could be because we'll still be able to sustain a reasonable program there, but it'll be much more about maintenance rather than the aggressive program. And one of the things that's going to be a real highlight for us, assuming that Landcare Research can breed up enough bugs, is we have the WASP program. So to me, I think this will be, if it works as we hope, it'll be a game changer for us. I'm really excited about this. So this is a hoverfly and a beetle that we have. So council led the bid, which is really good. One really cool thing about Tasman is we're very nimble, and the distance between Janine and myself is quite short. So we end up with the ability to grab opportunities really well, particularly ones that we're not paying for. And in this space, it's been a really good collaboration between science and council working with, there's a whole WASP group, which is like grape growers, you know, anybody affected by WASP problems. So we've been able to work, we've gone through the regulatory process to get these organisms brought into the country, and they're breeding them up at the moment. What they do is their offspring, so a hoverfly, which you see, everybody's kind of aware of those little flies that hover around the flowers in summer. So hoverfly and a beetle, they actually get into the wasp, into the cells where the wasp larvae are, and it's pretty gross to watch, and they wiggle down and then they eat the larvae out from the bottom up, so the wasps don't even know that they're present. And so even if they just knock out, you know, a few tens of percentage of wasps, because we have some of the highest densities of wasps in the world, it'll be significant for us, because the wasps are not only a problem for people, and we have had wasp deaths in the top of the south, but they're a huge problem for biodiversity. So they're robbing the food for our birds. they're also, when they go through their protein stage, they're also just stripping out the forest of invertebrates. They eat a lot of invertebrates, and we have some incredible invertebrates and like platypus, but also some pool millipedes and things that you don't commonly see around town. We have some awesome flora and fauna top of the south. So if that program comes off as we hope, and indications are that it should be really good, that will be a real game changer for us, and then that will spread out across the country. Hazards, you'll see some of the newer councillors might not have heard the name Eric Verstappen. So we used to have Eric worked here. Had been here for a long time and was very familiar in the rivers space around how rivers behaved. And so we had a really good relationship between now Community Infrastructure, used to be called Rivers, and us around the management of rivers. And for a few years, we lost that ability to have that holistic view. And we now have Alistair Clement on board. So he's a former lecturer from Massey University. And so this is his space. So now that David Stevenson's in that team, we've got a really good relationship between those two. So we're seeing some really positive outcomes. And I think it's a really nice opportunity now to leverage on that, whereas we were relying on engineering to provide some of that support to us. So that's been a great benefit to get back into that. The last couple of things, the catchment roles, you will have heard Kim talk about those catchment roles. That's a fantastic outcome. And again, the tolerance that management give us to pursue opportunities and to essentially adapt and change quickly has allowed around the country a funding opportunity to be grabbed, and that's how we've got our 3 catchment roles and partially funding a 4th role, which will be introduced in July. This is the space that we've wanted to be into for a long time, but it's expensive. So these roles are fully funded for 3 years. This is where we'll have a person that works directly with landowners, so the interface or the navigator, or if you're old enough, a Babel fish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that can interpret what we say and interpret what the landowners say, because of course sometimes we don't always speak the same language, and actually have really positive outcomes. And you'll hopefully have seen Jane's enthusiasm when she's talking about opportunities to work with landowners. And the big pressure in this space, and council, you will get your ears chewed a little bit in the next coming years, as we have some hard crunches from the legislation coming. So by the end of 2024, we have to start doing farm plans. So that's not every landowner, but in our district, it's 1,700 landowners. And so this is another whole language that they're having to learn around legislation. But our intention is to have a really friendly approach. So we don't want landowners to spend thousands of dollars on consultants who will come to us for the information, because that's how it works in this space. What we want to do is we want them to be able to self-serve, and then the navigator between the landowner and us are these catchment roles. So this is a fantastic initiative, and it's I would say one of the best initiatives that MFE has rolled out across the country, because they've actually invested in the people to do the job that they've set the legislation for. Normally they come up with wonderful ideas. That might be a little bit rude. They come up with wonderful ideas that we have to implement. And it is quite hard to implement some of these ideas. This one they have funded, and it's a fantastic outcome. So we're really excited about that opportunity. And especially that we're not asking you for more money for those roles. So you might have noticed a small change in the building, down second to last point, a small change in the building. All of our hydrology team is now over in the church across the road. And so our network is working really well, and the commentary about Esk Valley and our kind of redundancy in the system to make sure we can maintain. So we are acutely aware of being able to watch the district remotely to see where the water's falling and where the flows are rising. And so we're putting just making sure that is working really well. And I do extend the invitation to all councillors, if you want to see what they're doing. All of our team, they're slightly nerdy in that they love to talk about what they do. Well, all of council loves to talk about what they do, because we all want to be here, which is exciting. But But if you want to, and you don't have to listen to stories about velvet worms, you could hear a story about fish or something else. But we do love the opportunity to talk to you because you're the interface between us and your community. And it also means that when you get questions that they don't seem right, or I'm sure staff wouldn't have said that, we'd love to be able to clarify it for you, because we might have said it and it's, we could have used better language, or it might be completely misinterpreted. And so again, some of the work we're doing, you'll see the pictures of the lower Waimea River Delta, where we're doing a whole lot of planting and habitat restoration work. We love to show that stuff off. So if you've got a spare lunchtime, give me a yell, and either myself or one of the staff will take you out and have a look, because it is stuff that we love to do, and it's how we sell what we're doing, because we're doing great stuff. We're pulling in the external funding to do this work, so we really want to sell it because it is awesome. And then, of course, I do have an ulterior motive when it comes to the LTP. We want to tell you why we need more money. And lastly, I guess the lakes program, there's a lovely picture of a really dirty lake. I wouldn't be concerned about that, because that's birds causing that particular one. It's a really well-known spot, and I'm surprised the duck shooters aren't lining up there every year for that lake. But that's been another really good opportunity. Being nimble, we've been able to follow a program that Cawthron have been doing and actually leverage off the back of that. So we pay Cawthron to do the sampling for us so we can get that information. Otherwise, it would have been a big program for us to try and pick up ourselves. So most of the time, what we're trying to do is we're trying to broker advantage for us from other programs. And you'll see that all through my report, like the soil mapping, we only pay a third of that program. So we're trying to find those little things. So yeah, I think I've probably talked enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And for somebody who's not a scientist, the passion both in your report and your presentation comes through with the work you do. So I guess with that passion, you hooked on scientists, like on non-scientists like myself. But the other bit I found really interested in your report, Rob, was the number of times you talked about working together, compliance, information services, wider collaboration with the community. So questions? Councillor McKenzie, then Councillor Mailing, then Deputy Mayor Brian.
Thank you very much, through the chair. I've just got a couple of questions, if I could work through them, Mr. Chair. But I just want to start. Last time, Rob, I was talking to you at your desk. I just recall that you had been the recipient of a council internal award, and I just want to congratulate you on that, because your passion and enthusiasm definitely does come through. I think you were mentioning those photos in our report under paragraph 516 of Nyman Creek. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic to see that change over time. And that's all you need, in actual fact, to tell the story about what's being achieved, because you can see it there. I guess I've always had a sort of a concern in the back of my mind about some of these projects where it's really easy sometimes to get the enthusiasm, get the funding and get underway. But in actual fact, how do you ensure that we actually have the resourcing and the funding to do those longer term jobs of spraying and releasing once we've done the initial plantings? And so that's my first question really, is do you ever have any concerns about ensuring that you get those gains in an enduring way?
Through the chair, here's the sting in the tail for my story. Yes, we are concerned. You will be aware that or you may be aware, Project Yansoon in the Abel Tasman National Park, it's an awesome program and funded by a philanthropic couple. It's stunning. They have an agreement with DOC called the Tomorrow's Accord, I think it's called that, where the philanthropic work knocks down the predators and the weeds, but then DOC has to maintain at a low level. And we don't have that agreement, which is very interesting. What we've tried to do, so a lot of this work has been funded, particularly with that external money, because we've done it over a 3-year program. What we do is when we plant, we then have 2 years of maintenance following, because as Councillor McKenzie said, we can normally find enthusiastic people to plant. Everyone loves planting. Nobody likes weeding. And so that's where we lose plants. We try and put a weeding program in, and community infrastructure certainly manage that themselves when they're doing their reserves. So what we try to do is get that cover, try and block out the weeds as fast as we can. But it will be one thing as we go. So in 2 or 3 years' time, when that funding runs out, we will want something to be able to manage the period until they're established. So we have a catchment fund at the moment. We have cut that quite a bit next year, and I'm really happy with that to support managing rates. But we will be looking through time to then readjust that to be able to do that management. The other thing I forgot to say is a lot of this is like in Nyman Creek here, you're actually looking at private land. So the landowner has been really good. And we have awesome landowners in this district. There's very few not nice people in our district. Terrible grammar. Most people in our district love to be here. They've chosen to be here, and they actually committed. And so when we're working with landowners, we can normally get quite a bit of leverage out of them to do some of the maintenance as well. So yes, so there's a positive landowners. The negative is sometimes we do have to do that legacy management, and so we try and manage that through in the future the catchment fund.
Thank you very much. I just with regards to the control for wasps. So over time, are you hoping that this would remove the need to do Vespex control with wasps, if in actual fact we have these, larvae eating out the eggs, and how does that how does it infiltrate all of the district? I mean, as a landowner that currently has my Vespex control signs out in my fence, there'll be many landowners who would welcome this, but how does it infiltrate all of our properties?
Through the chair, I'd love to say that it would potentially remove that. The reality, the way biocontrol works, so what's an example? You've said, ragwort's a classic example. So if some of you remember back into the 80s and 70s, around particularly in places like Murchison, West Coast, you saw ragwort everywhere, and it's a problem with cattle. So a couple of biocontrol agents were introduced. Most people know that little prickly black caterpillar. There's several others that we've introduced since. Ragwort now, this year has been an exception. Ragwort now is hardly ever seen. And so biocontrol will knock stuff down, but it never removes it entirely, because, as the prey numbers drop, the predator numbers drop. And we see it with mast deer. We get lots of seed and the rats grow, and then the stoats grow following it, and the rats die, and the stoats, after they've eaten the native birds, then they drop back again as well. So they follow each other, but at a lower level. So there will always be a need for targeted intervention, probably. Not being a wasp ecologist, I couldn't say the final outcome, but if we could you imagine if we took half the wasps out, it would be a massive change. Imagine going into our beech forest and not hearing that hum. Most people think it's normal to hear a hum in the beech forest. That's not a normal noise. That's wasps. It's horrible. So yeah, it won't remove the need for targeted control, but it will suppress the numbers.
Mr. Chair, just my last question. I guess I probably am starting to raise this quite frequently, but I'm just looking for an assurance that control of feral cats is something that we're actively considering our options and the way to move forward.
It's tricky ground. It has been a proposal brought to council in the past. If councillors wanted to bring that proposal back, the proposal at the time was not to, and it is really sensitive ground. We have to be super careful in this space. What we really want is it to be dealt with nationally. This is a national problem, And anybody who's a sheep farmer knows the impact of feral cats. Anybody who's a biodiversity person knows the impacts of feral cats. What we want to do is have an adult conversation about the difference between owned and unowned cats. And so that's why we want it to be done nationally. We can do it locally, and we have asked in the past. Wellington has done it. And all we would ask for is to be able to require microchipping. And what that allows us to do is when we support community groups doing management of cats, and we do this already around the Waimeri Street, but actually we're paying for the microchipping for those cats, is that when they come across a cat, normally a feral cat's pretty obvious when it's we catch them in live cage traps. You can make that decision about whether it's feral or not normally. But actually the safe way to do that is to scan it for a microchip. And if we don't have a microchip, we can't tell it. So it could just be a really nasty domestic cat. And they are a huge problem. And I'm not sure that everybody, and maybe this would be an opportunity to bring a paper back to council, but because they cause a lot of a huge financial loss to sheep farmers. And of course, with our endangered hectares and Maui dolphins, there's some fairly strong evidence that they're one of the causative agents. That they have a reach. In fact, I could safely say that a few people in this room probably carry the parasite in them from cats. They are a problem for humans as well. So it is an issue that we need to be aware of, but we have to do it in a really safe conversation. And it gets polarized and it gets really nasty very fast. So I would love to have the conversation, but
Mackenzie's got a lot more questions.
Well, I think it's, you have said maybe you could bring a paper back, or I know that we did attempt to do something in the last triennium, but maybe we could have another workshop. We could have another go to see what our appetite is. So I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, is that something that we could have as an action?
I guess we could, Councillor. Mr. Drummond, have you got anything to add in terms of, and where's the appropriate committee for that to go back to, whether it's policy and strategy or whether it's the regulatory?
I think there's a case for dealing with it similar to what we're dealing with the vehicles on beaches sort of approach to say, okay, what are the wider range of issues here? What are the various options? But just to reiterate on what Rob's saying, the focus now on cats has increased, and I think it really got brought to a head with the concerns around the Maui and Hector's dolphins. And of course, New Zealand fishing industry have been subjected to a whole range of regulations to avoid the possibility of them catching one of those. But the major source of death is indeed toxoplasmosis sourced through cats. So I think as a nation, there's a heightened awareness now that this problem has probably moved to a greater level than previously. I certainly endorse what Rob is saying. This is actually a national conversation, if in an ideal world, but there doesn't seem to be the willingness to embrace it. Those who are imposing rules on the fishing industry, for instance, have done nothing, absolutely nothing to address the real issue. They're addressing a symptom, not a problem. And I think that's where the problems of our central government are. They're not looking at the problem, they're looking because it's too difficult. So somewhere, someone's got to take the stand to say, actually, we'd like to have a decent look at this. It could be the Tasman District Council. It's quite a bit of work involved. Very sensitive area to work in, but I don't see any harm in starting the conversation.
So on that basis, in terms of similar to the vehicles on beaches, that in terms of an action list, a paper be brought back to regulatory. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Mailing.
Well, I can confirm that there's one less feral cat after our trip to the Molesworth a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't too far away, so it was an easy shot. And what I will add, and I know Rob was there probably the same weekend as me, I saw less feral cats in the Molesworth than I've seen in the past. So that's something. But Rob, what I wanted to talk about was wilding pines. And recently I've been in Marlborough and in the Molesworth and seen massive amount of work in wilding pines and also in Mount Richmond Park. Will there be some sort of follow-up? Because the biggest concern that I have, and I see we've carried some money over, is throughout New Zealand, we've spent millions and millions of dollars on wilding pines in the last 3 years, but that'll all be wasted if we don't have a follow-up maintenance program. And I'm just wondering, have you heard anything from central government that there will be going forward for this? Because we will spend tens of millions of dollars through the Jobs for Nature for this, and you can see big impact. But I don't want that to be lost.
It's an active area of conversation. So I think the present budget is something like 25 million a year, and we're dropping to 10 next year. So we're looking at around 190,000 plus the carryover. It is a huge problem because the seed is long lived, and particularly some of those species, so we're trying to control them from takeoff points. You might hear people talk about takeoff points when it comes to wilding conifers. We're trying to get them off the ridge tops because then they fly for a long time. And it wasn't long ago that we're actually planting these plants. You know, it's 50, 70 years ago that we were planting all these plants up there. So it's another problem story that's our own. So part of the answer is when the joint committee meets next week for regional pest management plan discussions, that is one of the topics to be discussed there is, do we introduce a rule? Marlborough is introducing a rule in their plan. It is not through appeal stage at the moment. So we are following very closely to see what's there. And there's probably a safe place to work, but we have to remember that some of the same species causing the problem are also really important to this district economically. So it's finding that who's responsible and how to manage, because of course a lot of this problem is not a product of the present forest owner. A lot of this problem is, it's history, and we have to correct it. So yeah, it's something we have to tackle as a country, and we're certainly lobbying very hard to make sure that we don't walk away from the investment that's been made.
If I could just, we've got Brad with his hand up, so I'm not quite sure in terms of what response to what question, but Brad, welcome.
Thank you. Kia ora, everyone. I just met with the national program manager the other day, actually, and he was saying that this year operationally they spent 32 million nationally, and they're getting cut to 8 mil next year, and that's what they're getting going forward. So it's it's not good news at the moment, and they're working hard to try and see how they can make that 8 million go as far as possible, and more out of control space and more into like innovation and research and development.
Thanks, Brad. Councillor Manning.
At least there's some money to be spent going forward. Now, the other one I've got is it's a funding one, because we had a workshop yesterday in terms of long-term plan, and the government is always great at funding staff for a period of time. So catch from people, I think, is a really important thing, and we'll bring our farmers along with us. But my concern is that in 3 years' time, we've suddenly got three and a half positions or 3 positions that we want to continue with, and that's a cost to the ratepayer. So, and the cost of people are not cheap, and then you've got the backup as well. If you take their salary, you virtually need to double their salary if you look at the overall cost. So do you think there will be some follow-up funding from MFE, or am I going too far in the future? Because I see it as being important with the change happening, but I just worry about the funding going forward.
Yes, if I could take that one. So I guess where the council interests and the agency interests come together is typically a national discussion. So this is where the seeds were sown for if MFE saw a different approach, what degree could they support it? So they have got a funding stream out 3 years, and we're taking advantage of that. And indeed, I just add that a lot of the capacity that we're supporting that with is actually capacity we have here. We're developed here. So these positions are just right for people to move into. So the gaps that we have are, we need to backfill where they've come from. But that's a positive thing, because I think what that's saying is that we're, as a council, we've geared ourselves up for going down this track. And I think that Rob's saying it's positive, and you've said that yourself. Now, where MFE go with their funding is an ongoing discussion. But rest assured, the pressure is on them to continue that funding stream beyond their 3 years. But that's as far as they can commit, given the appropriation cycle they're working within.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bryant, then Councillor Kinmoth, and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite like to talk about all those subjects, but better not do all of that. So just a couple from me. In relation to the catchment coordinators, Rob, the Motueka one, is that funded for us or partially funded? Because that does seem to be a slightly different process where they've appointed the person themselves. Or going to, as I understand it.
This is a really busy space at the moment. This is a massive funding program that's gone across the country. For the catchment role that you're talking about, that's actually one that the funding, so the Catchment Collective attracted the funding themselves. So regional councils attracted funding, iwi attracted funding, a lot of the Mountains to the Sea Trust attracted funding, Landcare Trust attracted funding. So the funding, there's a whole lot of groups attracted the same kind of funding. And the really good thing for us is that one of those groups was the Motueka Catchment Collective. So that's their own position.
Right.
And so they will work alongside ours, particularly in the Motueka, because we've got 11 different land uses going on in Tasman, and most of them are in Motueka, and it's a big catchment. So they'll be working closely with us.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to go on and say, because they're doing really good work and around the catchment, engaging with landowners. In fact, there's been a real show of passion around the river, both from all parts of the community coming forward. So it would be really good to work collaboratively with those people if we can.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the cool stories, and once we've got them up and running, we'll actually do a little presentation to the committee if they're interested around how this is all going to work and how we're going to stack up all the information so people
that would be great.
Cut through the information for their site and how that'll work. Because I'm excited about it. I think it's a really good opportunity. So it's nice to be able to deliver in a friendly way for what, normally we can be a little bit bureaucratic, but in this case, we're going to be the ones feeding information out. So hopefully saving quite a bit of money to the individual landowners. But we're not going to do it for them. They're going to have to do some work themselves, but we'll work with them.
And point them in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so the next one is one that we have been a little bureaucratic in times, just in relation to wetlands, and you've got quite a bit in the report here. But where are we in the overall thing of having to map all the wetlands in the district? And I forgot the date because I'm not sure if it gets pushed out or I forget, but it seems like we've been doing this since about 2014.
Yes, so this is a very old rule in the plan. So it came into the TRMP.
But isn't the national legislation that supersedes that?
National legislation. So the big driver for this is the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. It has been proposed as an NPS 3 times now in the last more than a decade. The present one, I would have put money on it, was finally going to arrive last year. It got its date shifted several times last year. We were absolutely certain we were going to have it in December. It was on the minister's desk waiting for a signature. We don't have it yet. It's really unfortunate. It is going to be really controversial when they release it. So will it be released this year now? I wouldn't like to bet in an election year. But the implications of the NPS, we're aligned very well, and that's another really cool thing about Tasman. It's the Celebrate Tasman Day today, isn't it? Another really good thing about Tasman is when we had that issue, because wetlands are very contentious, and if you remember back when SNAs were talked about, significant natural areas, and the rally cry was appropriation by legislation, and everybody thought we were coming in to take the land, and Huranui was probably a hotspot for that. Now, the reality is, so to take all of that sting out of that, we worked with the stakeholders, and we have a memorandum of understanding with those stakeholders. So we've been working closely with landowners to voluntarily go and map their, we don't call them SNAs, we call them, it's a Native Habitats Tasman program. And we've got about 70% of those landowners on board to have us come in and write them a report for their asset and management options. So when the legislation comes out, I'm saying when and not if, when it comes out, we'll actually be really well placed. The wetlands component of that we've been running parallel, but it's actually the same work, except the wetlands stuff actually has some regulation behind it because that's been in our TRMP for a long time. So we're using a friendly approach to that. We have, and I mentioned, we used to have Drone doing a lot of our mapping, contracted to us. We had a really long-term relationship with Drone. He was very affordable. He's not affordable now, he's gone to the dark side. But we have found another affordable contractor to work with us to finish that mapping, because once we've mapped all of these wetlands, then the landowners know where they are, and we won't capture 100%, but at least when that legislation comes out or it's enacted, we will be able to say that we are pretty much done in that space. So we're trying to do this in a really friendly, quiet way. And so we're not going to suddenly roll out in our white utes and start mapping everything, because we've actually largely done it. So then we want to transition into that. How do we help the landowners manage that bit? And that's some of that discussion about fencing assistance or weeding. We are part of, through the government funding, we're going to be weed management programs for 40 natural wetlands across the region in the next couple of years. So this is massive for us, because landowners aren't against keeping these features. The reason they're still there is because they valued them at some point. You know, if Nana or Granddad didn't want that block of trees, they would have gone a long time ago. The issue now is, of course, the vine weeds and the pests that are killing those trees. So by helping those people manage those vine weeds and stuff through that catchment funding, it's a real game changer, because suddenly they don't feel lost. You know, if we were to pay a dividend for biodiversity that you manage on your land, it would be quite a different story, but we don't. We as a community expect people to protect those assets, but they're actually their assets, and we assume that they're ours. So we do want a way to make that a friendly relationship, and by working through Native Habitats Tasman, that's been a really nice way to do that. So it is a very non-bureaucratic and non-regulatory way to do it, but we achieve the regulatory aims. The pinch will be those last 30%.
Any others, Deputy Member? Microphone.
By and large, we're not doing it by catchments now. Previously, we've done it by catchments. And I understood we had Waimeas in the land, the Tapawiri, Sherry and Tadmore Valley still to do, and maybe the Lower Kariri Valley.
You are correct. We are still basing it on that catchment. So we've tried to kind of we did Buller first, then we're in Golden Bay, and we're coming back over this way. So the last of the main mapping work is the Waimea Motueka. So yeah, we're still working on a catchment base. But the reality is, because there's landowner change, we're reactive to those situations. So if someone's changing land and they need a survey, we're actually targeting that survey to keep the process going. We don't want to hold them up.
Makes sense. Thank you.
That's all.
Councillor Kittermoth.
Rob, I might call you Rob. That's been exciting. One of the best presentations I've seen around here. And I've just looked around the people who were just enthralled watching you then. So congratulations, you're very good at your job. Okay. Now come to that. There's two types of wasps, paper wasps and German wasps. So this greebly thing that goes in, is that going to do both? Wasp, or just the one first than the other, or one better than the other?
Through the chair, the hoverfly and the beetle will only attack a vespilid wasp. So we have German and common wasps. Vespilid, they're the colony forming wasps that we know. We have 3 paper wasp species, and everyone will know paper wasps because their legs, they can't hold their legs up when they fly. It won't target those. They're a really hard group to target because they won't take your sorry, I've forgotten the name of the poison. Vespex, they won't take that because they take live prey. So they are a problem, and that's another story. So when we roll out a biocontrol, the big drivers for us, a lot of it has been around maintaining productive rural landscape. So that's why we've got, things to target the ragwort or buddleia or, clover beetles or things like that. The paper wasps are less of an issue in that space, so they probably haven't got the same amount of attention. They're also a lot less aggressive. But the only control that's going to work for them will be biocontrol, and at some stage there will be enough inertia. It's really expensive doing biocontrol, the development, and so we actually fund that collectively. So all the regional councils have a collective. We have a biocontrol collective that we put money into. So yeah, unfortunately, it's only the common and German wasps, but they are the worst species.
So you're talking about this program. Is this just a rural program, or are you talking about urban as well?
So the initial release sites are, but because the wasps are most numerous around beech forests. So we have the sites near the beech forests to establish them, because it's one of those curves, you have to get the numbers up fast. Once the numbers up, then you'll get self-spread, and also we'll be spreading them as well. So once there's enough numbers locally, we do it now. We'll go down to Canterbury, or we'll go to Marlborough and get their, biocontrol agents that they're using. We'll bring them back here. We also buy them. So every year we have a program to buy new agents. So they will be spread both by people and naturally. But we put them where they've got most chance of success, and that's not urban, that's in the beech forest.
May I continue through the chair?
You can have another question, Councillor Conroy.
Excuse me. Having been heavily involved in cutting some gorse in Higgs Reserve on Monday and feeling the scratches of it, I know full well the problems of getting people to come back and do the maintenance, the weeding. So how do you intend to do that? Is that going to be by contract, or by killing, spraying? How do you envisage the weeding program to continue?
Through the chair, so there's kind of two levels of program here. So one is the long-term program that would run out of Richard's space with the reserves team. And then ours is around the jobs for nature approach. So ours is a very targeted and short term. So we're capturing the funding opportunity. So for those ones, we're actually paying the contractor that plants them. They end up with a contract that has plant and maintain. So they'll do it. And if you drive up Mamaku Drive at the moment, the Ruby Bay bypass, you'll see they've just done a whole lot of control on the Dominion Flats on the other side of the road. And so they actually paid to kind of get those first couple of years, because most of those plants, once you've done those first couple of years, they're away. With our longer term running catchment program, where we're working directly with landowners, we have a little bit of trying to work with the landowners to get them to do some. Sometimes some of our landowners can be quite elderly, and it's really not an option for them. So we will try and find a way to get that. And we have, in a couple of situations, actually paid for some management in there just to keep it going, because we don't want to invest, because it's rate money. We don't want to invest and then lose that opportunity. So where there's a threat, we will actually try and back it up.
Feral cats. Came across one on Monday. We need a cage, and also need something to do with it. We were talking about going to a vet, but obviously the council assists with feral cats. Or what do I do with this feral cat? It's on a property.
I think you talked to Councillor Manning. If you could, if you've got a quick answer to that in terms of remembering. Councillor McKenzie's asked that a paper comes back to council in terms of discussing. If there's a quick one line that you could give Councillor Conroy some advice that's not Mr. Bunnings.
At the moment, normally the groups that we're working with would manage that themselves, because it does have to be humane. Absolutely, whatever we do supports some humane management of all pest animals. We do lend live capture traps out. We don't lend them to urban groups, because we don't want any inappropriate targeting of neighbours' cats. So we only lend them to to rural groups who are doing work in the rural environment, because we have to remember that someone's loved ones. Psychologically, a pet is, from a civil defence point of view, you have to treat them like it's family. So we have to, that's why it's a sensitive space. If you're working with a rural group doing that, then there should be a program around that. And I can talk to you later about that, how to deal with that if you'd like.
One last one. SNAs. I've got native habitat, but I can't remember the third word you called it. Native habitat.
So SNA is significant natural areas.
Yeah.
That's collectively.
Yeah.
NHT is Native Habitats Tasman.
That's the one.
So that's the name we've given that program, because SNA is a really loaded term, and in the mid-2000s, that's not a term we wanted to talk to landowners about.
I was listening to you talking about it, how wonderful you're getting on and preempting the government's initiative. Is that something that you want to put into the newsline or run a flag up a pole and say, look how bloody good we are, Tasman's leading the way? Or is that something you want to keep in-house at the moment until the legislation comes through?
We do like to advertise the NHT program, absolutely. And we do every now and then put articles in there about wetlands. We wouldn't talk about well, we are publicly, of course, now, but we don't normally talk about the MPS implications and the NHT program. NHT program is running well as is. Let's just keep running well. And when the NPS comes in, that's when we'll start talking about the wider implications of the NPS. And that's because that will capture, it's actually less than 30% now, that will capture those people that don't want to actively engage with us for whatever reason. Some of them might be perfectly valid. So that's when it really starts to have an impact, and that's a time we will have a much more deliberate program, and we would certainly tell you about that because you'll be getting the phone calls not long after.
Thanks, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, I wanted to go to 4.14 about the Catchment Enhancement Fund. And, you know, it's really clear from what you've been saying this morning that council has to work in partnership with private landowners, which is something that DOC don't have to do so much. So I am aware that the issue of fencing is a very sensitive one for a lot of landowners, and all the work we're doing on wetlands, you know, everything on private land raises the issue of fencing. And I know it's a sensitive issue for landowners. So I'm just wondering whether or not we've got sufficient funds to continue our program of supporting landowners to fence wetlands, or whether or not, given, you know, the increased work in establishing wetlands on private land, whether or not that needs to be increased. It would just be useful to know whether or not that fund is actually, whether we've got adequate funds.
Oh, this is tricky.
So, I mean, I don't, if you can't answer it now,
I can absolutely ask it. It was one of the savings we've made for next year. We have halved that program. It is a really popular program, and it's not a decision made lightly, but it is. It's the balance between private gain and public gain with using rate money. So it's always a tricky ground. Wherever there's a requirement for a fence under another reason, so if there's a supply agreement or a stock exclusion requirement, we don't supply those fences. We don't do boundary fences. We try and make sure that the fencing fund, which was really, when it was set up, was targeting waterways, includes those other additional benefits. So if it's a wetland that doesn't need a fence at the moment, there's a good chance that we would try to work with them, either between the fencing fund or the catchment fund. So both those funds we've dipped for next year. We are going to come back to you to talk about rebuilding those funds. And that's leveraging off the back of the government money at the moment. So we saw an opportunity to save some rates. But yes, there's never enough money for everything. And you'll hear it from everybody who talks to you. They never have enough money. Yeah, but we try where we can.
Yeah, so I think just for the future, it would be good to, you know, as we go into the long-term plan discussions, that we need to have that, you know, up at the surface.
Thank you. Councillor Shellcrest.
Yeah, just on the maintenance of our plantings, how much are we utilising our like PD workers and things like that through the council?
Through the chair, it's probably when grant from reserves comes and talks, that's probably much more in their space. So for us with the Jobs for Nature work, the way Jobs for Nature works, it was all about providing, so it was a COVID response, so it was all about providing employment. And so part of our requirements, so one of, in Janine signing that deed, we have an obligation to meet an FTE target. And so for those jobs, it actually is much more efficient, and we get that employment figure by actually paying the planting contractors to do the maintenance. And it has been good. There's been a huge number of people trained in our district to do that kind of stuff through this program. So yeah, that one, it's slightly different management. As far as the general work, that's much more a community infrastructure. Yeah.
Councillor Ellis.
Hi, Rob. Thank you. Through the chair. I'm just interested in the 4.49 post-harvest restoration project. I have a couple of questions just very quickly. I'm pleased to see that we're taking an innovative approach with an issue that's in the public eye at the moment. As I'm assuming that that's in the Kingsland Forest area. Where's that being done?
Through the chair. So you heard Brad talking before. So at the moment, another government funded role, got a lot of government funded roles at the moment. So he works right across the top of the south. So that's a Te Taihu approach, and which finishes this June. So that work is actually part of that top of the south. So that's much more the higher level rather than the dedicated on the ground. So in this case, it's actually working with industry rather than on a particular site. So for us, working on particular sites is where we're working with iwi and forestry companies around Moroho to convert previously harvested stuff to Mānuka forest as a transition forest. Or I saw in Kim's report around the redwood process in Liger Bay. Actually, that was a really nice adaptive approach as well, where that landowner, as of right, could have replanted with radiata, but they also could have asked us for some fencing assistance for their waterways. So we worked together with them to actually promote, rather than the fencing, to promote the redwood in the tricky land and in the gullies, because redwoods, when you cut them down, the roots stay alive. So they're really good for a long-term forest cover, but they have a slower rotation. So you have to have, it's a different approach to forest management. So yeah, for the forestry stuff, I understand Pauline is still managing that. That will come back to council around management of that, because it is a Tasman Environment Plan issue. So I would get out of my depth very quickly if I got into that.
All right, do we have a mover to receive Rob's report? Move, Councillor Mailing, second. Councillor Kinloth, all those in favour, aye. Against carried. Thanks, Rob. Good. Thank you. And you would note that just about everybody asked you a question, so you definitely got some engagement. Okay, takes us to item 8.4 in that annual air quality report. Welcome, Diana. Welcome. We're in your hands.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. For the benefit of new councillors, I'm Diana Worthy. I work in the Environmental Policy team. Next to me is Kathy Richardson, who works in our compliance team. And we also have Anna McKenzie online, and she is our resource scientist, contaminants. Normally, Anna would be in the chambers, but she's at home recovering from a cold today. So in terms of the report, I'll take it as read, but I'd like to give a quick update to councillors in relation to our research work program for this year. So staff are currently developing that. We're taking on board all the information that we collected last year and giving the the limited budgets we have, we're being responsive to that information and trying to work out what is the best way to move forward, keeping in mind that at some point in the future, we'll be moving towards monitoring and management of PM 2.5. We'll be able to report back to councillors once we have scoped that program and it's finalised. So happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Deputy Mayor Bryan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Diana, once again for a fully and comprehensive report. But I'm very interested in particularly in the Wakefield airshed and the monitoring results that you've got from there, having now lived there again for 4 years. And it's very interesting that the exceedance was on 45 days. I find that quite hard to believe, other than particularly there's usually a lot of southerly wind, and particularly in the mornings, but we did have a wet winter, which we didn't seem to get the wind the same, and I do wonder if they contribute to it. And I'm well aware that some of the people who are particularly around from our property, we can view 2 roads, have not got good wood burning habits. You can see from their smoke, they're burning green wood and or not operating their fire correctly. And in fact, I had this reinforced to me last week when the guy came to clean our chimney, and he was asking me about one of our neighbours and what had happened to that property. And then he went to tell me that the chimney was so sooted up in this house that he could, and he was one that did it from the bottom with a drill. It was so sooted up with soot and kerosene, he couldn't get the device up the chimney. And I noted that this house was always smoky, smouldering, they're burning wet wood, and it's just, it only takes 1 or 2 like that, and there is a couple round, and the whole thing can get blown just by those people not operating their fire correctly. In comparison, and I'm not skiding, I'm just sharing this, we've got a clean air burner. He got 2 litres of it soot out of our fire, and it worked really well, and we hardly ever have any smoke coming out. We got a clean air burner put in inadvertently, but it actually turns out to be a wonderful burner, and actually is hotter than the fire we used to have in the wooden house at Tapawera. So if you operate them efficiently, they do work really well. But I'm getting to the question. Where are the monitors? Are they outside these houses that I'm talking about? All right. But I'm interested about, it seems unusual that that's so high.
So through the chair, we undertook a research project last year. We had monitors in both Brightwater and Wakefield, and the type of equipment that we use is called a dust mote. So it's a very cool, it's a low quality, cheap sensor, but it's really good for research purposes, because if you run the air quality National Environmental Standard approved monitors, they're very expensive. So it was a research project. I can send you the full report because we are going to put it up onto the website for the community to have a look, and also do some comms through Newsline and Facebook, etc. But we had 3 locations in both of these communities, and what it showed for all the locations, it seemed to be the 2 northern sites in both Wakefield and Brightwater that had the highest concentrations. And I think largely that's got to do with topography, also what we call these katabatic winds coming down at night. So it pushes through the smoky air. And they were the 2 sites that were closest to the river.
And that quite often does happen, that you get a strong southerly in the morning, yes, and a northerly in the evening, and the southerly, as I say, in the morning, which is more likely pushing that forward. So it may not be directly coming from those houses immediately adjacent to your monitor.
Yes, that's right. It seems that it pulls in different areas, yeah, depending on a number of factors. So somebody else is going to say now, I've totally lost it off the top of my head. But yeah, it's been a really good indicator of where we're at for those 2 communities, because we didn't have very much data. And so for us going forward, if we are required to move to this PM 2.5 management regime, we will probably more than likely need to, I suppose, gazette airsheds for those two communities and start a proper monitoring and management work program there.
Are you looking to do that for this coming winter?
Not at this point in time, because we need to get direction from central government in terms of actually what is the regulation.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And so just so I'm clear, so that if the site is by your house, Councillor Bryan, it's because of the wind, isn't it? It's not because. Thank you. We've got Councillor Marlin, then Councillor Walker, then Councillor Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Diana, for your report. And I'm pleased to see the exceedances in Richmond have reduced, but that's only for the PM10. How are we going to manage when it goes to 2.5? And the second question now, that the real concern I have is NO2 as well. And if I think of our two biggest towns, we've got state highways right through the middle of them. So Richmond and Motueka, right through where we've got housing. And we aren't doing work on that. Nelson has done some when I've read the report. But what are our concerns about NO2 going forward?
So through the chair, the report has really flagged that we need to get clarity from central government in terms of what will the standard be around PM 2.5 before we can actually respond. But without a doubt, it's going to require a lot more budgets, a lot more resourcing to be able to progress and start managing that. I would expect through the RMA reform and the national planning framework that will be coming through, it will give that clear direction in terms of what the expectation is around the regulations. In relation to nitrogen dioxide, it came through very clearly through the Health and Air Pollution New Zealand research that the impacts in terms of nitrogen dioxide in relation to the health of people, it was a surprising find of that study. And so we need to respond to that. Also, the World Health Guidelines have reduced their targets and recognise that as well. And so as signalled in the report through the LTP process that's kicking off now, we will need to allocate budget to actually start doing a monitoring program as part of council's work, recognising Waka Kotahi already does some work in this space too. But I think we need to start building our own council baseline of information, particularly around these larger townships like Richmond and Motueka.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, through Mr. Chair. Just furthermore to that, Diana, first of all, thank you for a very good report. I'm looking at item 4.6, which is pretty much probably where Councillor Mailing was coming from. Given that you've had this report from central government, March 2022, I note that the stats that they use is data from 2016, so it's a little bit sad that it's 6 years old. I'd like to see some more current data, and that they associated 34 deaths towards this, the challenge that we have with our NO2s. And the social impact costs that have been, put against that of $159 million. As a council, we must have a social conscience around what this is costing our wider community. This clearly says Tasman stats. And I note that, there is a conversation about looking at it in the long-term plan. But I do question where the appetite is in this room about actually the long-term plan is something that's, 10 years and potentially will deliver some of it in 3, depending on what the climate's like, whether there's other outbreaks of COVID and cyclones or whatever the gentleman wanted to call them, those weather events yesterday. Do we ask, can we get more current data? Because this is 6 years old. And it's a little bit sad for me to be reading something where people have lost their lives that happened all that time ago. Can we get more relevant current data? And what's the appetite from you and this council around addressing that?
Through the chair, the methodology that sits behind that Happens report, it's very extensive, very complicated. This was a national study that was led through Ministry of Health and a number of other government departments. my understanding was that there was actually a delay in terms of the report being released because it had to have international peer review because of what the findings were showing. So they had to be really confident in terms of that information. I don't think that locally there is the ability to get updated information around that health information, just because when someone presents themselves, say at hospital or the GP with health effects, there's privacy issues in terms of that. And so that's why it's been done at a national level, because you can round the stats up and make it higher. I think for council, the best way forward is to actually start doing some local monitoring so we can understand better in terms of our transport emissions, what is going on, and other wider council work programs in terms of things like, getting people out of their vehicles, stop the source of nitrogen dioxide and things like public transport, streets for people, all those kind of other work programs also helps to contribute here and make a difference on the ground.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Diana, for your report. I was pleased to hear you say that in Wakefield it was maybe coming from the north and not the south. I was a bit worried about my own fire there for a moment. I think particularly with the Wakefield and the Brightwater communities, I think there's a really great opportunity here to actually engage those community associations in the topic. So my ideal would be that you could email the chairs of those two organisations, alert them to the fact that the reports are available, and offer to actually go and give a small presentation and Q&A to those community associations. And then those community associations can advertise the fact that you would be coming and actually get that community interest in a topic which is actually really important for the health of those communities. So that would be, I would love to see that happen if that was possible. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, we can make that possible. Obviously noting that we do have a non-regulatory work program that includes education and advice across the district, but I take your point that we should be doing some targeted work now that we have the findings from that monitoring.
Any other questions? A mover. Moved by Councillor Bryant. By Deputy Mayor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Dowell.
Only every break for morning tea.
One more. Hang in there. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Yeah, it's carried. Thank you. One more. This might take us through to the scheduled morning tea, this next discussion, I think. So is it my end? Welcome. So item 8.5, vehicles on beaches, page 84 in terms of the agenda. Barry, welcome. We're in your hands.
What page?
So I talked to yes, Stuart. 40 South.
I don't think we've stopped.
So I'm like morning tea, yeah. One more. Just hang in there.
Hi, Maya Bengozi, policy planner. Here today to talk to the report Vehicles on Beaches, which was requested at the last meeting. You wanted an update on what staff are doing and potential options to address the issue happening in Golden Bay and the Motueka Spit. So through the chair, I'll take the report as read and just take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much for your report, Ryan. And, this is a topic that, concerns people who want to protect the birds on our beaches and the plant life. Just to go back to my previous question about the bylaw which Marlborough District Council have passed. Did you look into that, and were there a lot of difficulties along the way? Were there lessons to be learned? If council, because that would influence a decision by council probably as to whether or not to go down that track. And one of the issues would be monitoring and compliance. and how they would be tackling that.
Yeah, so through the chair, I looked into the Marlborough bylaw a little bit, and I've talked to Sarah at Marlborough District Council who was working on that. And she said for them, the biggest hurdle was probably with iwi because they didn't engage with them earlier on or early enough. But that's something that we will be doing as part of the TEP work program. So we've got a hui scheduled with iwi early next month to talk about the public access issues, including this one.
Deputy Mayor Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some familiarity having some family down the Marlborough coast now. It has been quite challenging for that community and the communities along that coast, particularly around this issue. And of course, it's divided communities, so it's some area we will need to tread carefully. And of course, down there where they have the added implication of fishermen using the beach or to go up and down, it takes services to their bikes, to their boats on bikes and stuff like that. So it's not going to be an easy proposal because, and it may be somewhat easier on these beaches where we haven't got people fishing, but in Marlborough, it certainly was controversial, and I think they've had to have 2 cracks at it, and the people you're talking to there may well have informed you. And they do have some very good long beaches that people do love to hone their bike on. And we recently went and visited one, Marfools Beach, and people actually make it a destination either to ride their horse or ride their bike on these beaches. So there's all sorts of implications. And I understand around the birds and the nesting and all of that, but there's also people's recreational needs and socials that you'll need to address that as part of the report, if there is a further report, because I know this one's only for information. And I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, Mr. Mayor, I gave you a big promotion. You better let me have my coffee. Sorry, Chair Murray.
It's short lived, I can tell you.
I guess like I sit on TECA's meetings, and LE agents comes up all the time about vehicles on beaches, about the birds nesting area, about the measures that we've gone to and the association have gone to, and they have installed physical barriers. But we still have a group of antisocial behaviour activists actively removing said barriers, going to links with a chainsaw, getting their vehicles and towing barriers and other things, so that regardless of what we put up, they're still accessing the beach. So I think when we're looking at what our options are and where we're moving forward, I think we need to be mindful that there is a group of people that no matter what you try are going to continue to have this said behaviour. But in the balance of that, for this particular area, there are a big group of people who respect it and enjoy it and love it. So I think it's a really fine line between balancing, acknowledging good behaviour and what works well in an area to that of the negative behaviour, and with that negative behaviour, the cost that it affects, e.g. getting in the helicopters to remove them because they're damaged and need physical health looked at.
I'm wondering if I assist in terms of perhaps Mr. Humphrey, because there's a notation in that report about a prosecution of, under the TMP that may be happening, or the RMA, just in terms of what is needed to do that to address where blatant breaches of potentially the RMA occurs. Is that?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, for you. There isn't a lack of teeth in the RMA. There's a lack of ability to get the information they need to enforce under the RMA. We recently received some very good information from a member of the public in Golden Bay regarding damage to Pied Oyster Catcher nests, and we are proceeding with that now. And the compliance officer who has been allocated that task is at the point of recommending certain options to us, which will be put through the group manager. So we will be taking action in that case. The issue is, I think we've got 87 kilometres of coastline, and physical barriers, as the councillor indicates, aren't always effective. You can actually make them out of stuff other than wood, which is more effective on chainsaws, but you've got to look at penalising the people who use the beach for the right reason, penalising people who use the beach to access their properties, penalising the people who use the beaches for genuine recreational purposes. And I know the report that you've got in front of you sort of addresses those issues as well. But the point that Councillor Walker makes is always going to be an element which is going to be a problem. Now, with the area, she actually suggests the Eddie H. Bajan Reserve. I had a meeting with reserves 4 weeks ago, and we've come up with a renewed plan to carry out some more actions there, which will hopefully bear results against the very people that the council is referring to. I don't want to go into detail because it would be inappropriate, but we will follow these up and we will do what we can. But as with all these things, many people think if you put a sign up, people obey it. People who want to obey it will obey it. People who don't want to obey it will either rip it down or they'll ignore it. So we are mindful of that. The smaller we can make the group that need to have enforcement carried out against them, the better. And we don't want to be penalising the people who are doing the right thing by trying to penalise people who are doing the wrong thing. So it's a very difficult balance. As a regulator, you're always criticised for not controlling people who are breaking the rules. But again, we've got to be realistic. And where we have hot points like Bajans, Eddie H. Bajan and Rototai, we are doing what we can, and hopefully we will do more.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, second question. Thank you. It's probably to do with Mr. Humphries again. Sorry. Just to do with compliance and our capacity to undertake compliance and where we're sitting at the moment. I understand in Golden Bay we have a part-time compliance person, and whether we should be looking in the future to increasing that, maybe by increasing dog license fees or something similar. Just, thinking, can we, looking on all fronts, we've just talked about the barriers, but if there was, some leeway to increase compliance, that would be another way we could go.
For you, Mr. Chair, it's a package of things we do. So physical barriers can work in some places. Education of people works in others. I'm a great believer in educate the children and get them nagging on the parents, and that works quite well. And we do that every year with the maritime safety that we do on the Clued Up Kids programme. So far as numbers of compliance officers, you can't have a policeman on every corner. And if you do, you're North Korea. So we don't want to be like that. Hopefully North Korea aren't listening, because now I'll be in trouble. But the reality is you can only police to a certain degree and actually be fair. The reality is, I believe currently we have an adequate amount of enforcement in Golden Bay. And if you wanted to do it on a per capita per enforcement officer, Golden Bay is well ahead of everybody else. But it is a very large area and it does have unique problems because of that. We also have support to Golden Bay in the fact that we have an allocated noise control compliance officer over there, which we didn't have for a lot of years. So that's why it's working well. The part-time officer we have over there, we direct him as best we can to where we know the problem areas are. But I don't think there's a lot of value in having somebody stand for 8 hours at a beach looking for somebody with a dog or somebody with a car, unless that area's got a particular problem and then you target it more, which is what we do. There's also support from this side of the hill in that the people who do the parking enforcement in Golden Bay normally come from this side of the hill. So I don't think Golden Bay is disadvantaged in compliance. I think people think that if they make a phone call, we can immediately get a compliance officer there for anything in Richmond. That's not normally the case. We can only allocate the work as to severity and urgency, but we will get an officer there at some stage, or we'll gather the information and carry on investigations from there. So I don't think Golden Bay is disadvantaged in numbers of compliance officers. I don't think we're ever going to be in a state where you could ring a compliance officer up and he or she will immediately respond and turn up there. If it's something that's so urgent, we have a police force, but of course they've got limited numbers and they've got a lot of responsibilities. So again, we're not policemen, we're compliance and enforcement officers. We have some powers, but and I do think that Golden Bay has a reasonable cover with compliance at the moment. And I don't think we can do too much more as it stands.
Thank you. Just one more, and that is there is comment in the report about the role of DOC and the Wildlife Act, and I appreciate that it's been difficult to maintain a relationship there. And are we still working, trying to have some sort of partnership with them on that?
For you, Mr. Chair, the group manager and myself had a meeting with DOC about 2 months ago in Motueka about this very issue. DOC have got resourcing issues like we have. They do have powers under the Wildlife Act and the Conservation Act, which we don't. One suggestion we made to them was where they have an area of outstanding value, such as Rototai Estuary, they may consider making that an area which is under the control of the Department of Conservation. And they can do that under the Conservation Act, and we discussed that with them. Further to the meeting 2 months ago, we had a meeting last week with the hierarchy at DOC and some of their local enforcement officers, and we've agreed on a strategy of assisting them and them assisting us with carrying out enforcement. We have agreed to give them support in the way of training of their officers, because I think with a lot of their staff, they're not normally enforcement officers, but to give them the skills they need to carry out the initial investigation so they can then go to their investigating officers or their regulatory officers or to us and say, we've looked into this and this is what we found. This is a problem for us, and we will assist them. So we're working very hard on that relationship. There has been a change over in Golden Bay, or will be a change shortly, of some of the staff there. I'm not saying the last staff was slack. I'm just saying we've got new people coming in. So it's a very good time to reset that relationship as well. And we are doing that. So we are working hard with DOC. We have a good relationship with police over there. And so we'll continue to foster those relationships and see what we can do.
Thank you. And Councillor Butt, you'd be happy to second the receipt report. And so before I move it, Board Member Knowles.
Thank you. Through the chair, look, we're in a new paradigm. We haven't got the same old school running around anymore in Golden Bay, doing it mostly, but we still have a few of the entitled coming through and doing this and thinking it's okay. And we do need to make it. We get people coming to the community board for the last 7 years since I've been on, complaining regularly. And I mean, I'm here today because I really want to emphasise how important it is that, you know, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Sometimes we put rocks in place and they move them. They complain about their fires for their drumming circles being unable to get the wood to them. It's a really a complex issue. And compliance isn't necessarily the best way to deal with this. We've educated people for years and years and years. And I think I know I'm over educating people. I'd rather just see something enforced, actually. And that's what I feel the majority of people in Golden Bay feel, is they just want enforcement on it. So if we can somehow do it, that's maybe more passive without having compliance officers and having less access to the beaches, only certain beaches perhaps. That's really all we need. We don't need all the beaches. And I know Cynthia's talked about, and Forest and Bird have talked about 7 or 8 sites that are of significance. If we can only just get those ones for starters sorted out, I think some of the rest of them, it won't matter so much. That's all we're asking for in Golden Bay.
Thank you, Board Member Knowles. Thank you. So we have moved by Deputy Mayor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Butler. All those in favour say aye. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sokresh.
Just a bit of a good news story. Tiramawiwi, where they've had obviously lots of issues with the quad blocks, alcohol and accidents. There was obviously a sting over there a few months ago, and I was talking to David Harwood, the landowner over there, and he's noticed a massive change with the behaviour and also numbers. So
that's a good news story. How long it lasts, I don't know. But for me personally, I think a lot of it is just the education around what these people are doing and self-policing. You know, you obviously can't have a policeman on every corner, but you know, if there's people out there that know what should be happening, shouldn't be happening, you know, whether there's some sort of way they can self-police would be good. So good news.
Adrian.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to give a bouquet to Councillor Shawcross as well. When this problem first arose, he put himself forward to be a liaison person with the landowner because he knew him, and having him involved was very good for us because he could talk to a guy at the right level. And, you know, we have worked with police as much as we can, and we have worked with DOC as well to try and get a solution. But had the council not been involved, it probably would have been a far longer path. So just to appreciate his input into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Acknowledged.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could perhaps summarise and bring the discussion together, drawing on the information that we had on the environmental front that we saw come through Rob. We've got a situation where there's more seabirds now in occupying these areas in our district than we previously had. So there's a good news story underpinning this. So, but which takes greater stewardship, guardianship obligations on us to take care of the activities that I guess people are getting involved in, which disturb the seabirds. It's not only about seabirds, it's also about our plants, and it's also about our social behaviour and trying to curb that. What we've heard from our planning colleagues today is that there's a measured approach being taken to look at how the planning framework that we have in play can start to take a better grip on these things. And there's some options that are coming through on that, none of which are live and being pursued in isolation at the moment, but there are some options. We're going to learn a little bit more from our colleagues in Marlborough about how they went down the bylaw approach and whether that is something that's suitable for us. We're lining up our discussions with our iwi partners, in particular Mana Whenua ki Mohua in the Golden Bay context. We're really engaging now to understand how they can, or how we can work with them to better carry out these environmental type obligations. And in the meantime, we have dedicated resources in the compliance team to say where there are problems, where the evidence can be collected, we'll act on it and we'll fix it, but it's a problematic environment. Maya has also pointed out we've got social communications going on, trying to talk about the nature of the problem and where this is occurring. So there's multiple disciplines approach as a holding pattern, but we haven't quite brought to you today the solution to the problem. So where I think this conversation's got us is that we're not advancing a silver bullet, but that we are showing commitment in terms of a more holistic approach, while recognising that right here and now we've got a job to do, and certainly Community Board Member Knowles is keeping us very honest in the Golden Bay space to making sure that we don't migrate away from this. And we've got people on Zoom today from that community who are actively bringing to us a sense of urgency. So wrapping that all up, we're not looking at a solution today, but I guess we're acknowledging that there's a problem here and there's multiple tools going to be brought to bear. And that's what regulation's all about. It's a craft. It's using the soft touches and the harder edges and understanding how we can utilise that to get the outcomes we're after. So I guess that's my point of summarising. I'm not suggesting we're going to do a particular action, but we've certainly got our eyes on this ball.
Thank you. So moved by Deputy Mayor Bryant, seconded by Councillor Butler. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Your treat is we can have a 10-minute break. I like that cue card. Welcome back. That was a nice quick cuppa. Okay, we are moving to page 441, item 8.6, and welcome Jackie.
Right, thank you. Tēnā koutou. So I'm Jackie Deans. I'm the growth coordinator and sit within environmental policy. And I've also got Briley Wayman with me, who's a senior policy advisor. And we both work on growth, housing and business work. So just a couple of things. I will take the report as read, but you will have noticed that the report is a little bit out of date in terms of the date it covers. So it covers a period June 2021 to June 22. And the reason for that is there's quite a lag in the data coming forward from central government. And I think the report was probably ready towards the end of last year, but obviously then we had local body elections and things. So here it is today, a little bit late. And also there is a mistake, I'm afraid, in the officer's report, paragraph 4.13. where we talk about the growth that was projected for Tasman in the long-term plan, 2021 versus what actually happened in that year period. It talks about that we saw higher growth than expected in Richmond, which is true, but it wasn't true in Brightwater and Mapua. The picture actually was overall we had an extra 111 houses in Tasman compared to what we projected in the long-term plan. The higher numbers were in Richmond and Golden Bay, but there was less than predicted in Brightwater and Mapua. And there was also less in Wakefield and Motueka and Lakes Murchison. So just a slight imbalance there is in terms of which towns were higher or lower. But hopefully that still makes sense, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? There was a sigh, but it wasn't. Councillor Marling.
Jackie, thanks for your report. I did notice when I was going through parts of this that our latest figures show a 9% downturn, I think, from what I read, 4.8. And talking to developers and housing construction, we're seeing a further slowdown. And I just read today that the national economy has contracted 0.6% in the last 3 months, or from the data. So are you getting that feeling from the people you're talking to as well?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say I am getting the impression that things are slowing a little bit, but I think what this report shows, and unfortunately the reports only look at a 12-month period, which is what we're required to do by central government. And so what they show is that the data is quite lumpy. So it's quite difficult to actually understand the overall trend because it's constantly changing. So yes, this time around building consents were slightly lower, but I think from memory we had more sections created. So that might mean that the next report that I do shows more building consents. So it's kind of constantly up and down a bit, really. But I guess the overall good news is that everything isn't trending downwards, and that hasn't been the case for some time for Tasman. It's generally upwards, yeah.
And the other comment would be, and it goes back to the workshop we had yesterday, generally we have exceeded our growth expectations than what we've actually had. Would that be a fair comment?
In the last 3 years, there was a real jump in not the year 2019, 2020. That was unexpected. The last couple of years have been fairly on track in terms of population with what was projected, but dwelling numbers have been quite a bit higher.
Happy to move on. Mr. Chair, thank you. So, Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, just in terms of timing and the data, I guess because we are in this sort of complex situation at the moment, you know, across the country with respect to inflation, recession, changes in demand and all the rest of it. How are you going to make sure that we get the best, most up-to-date data to inform some of the high-level assumptions that we might need to make for the LTP? Because, you know, if it was like status quo, it wouldn't be so important, but it's quite dynamic out there. So how will we get good reporting to inform the LTP?
So we have commissioned updated projections, population projections, but they are mostly based on census data to get that detail we need. And obviously that's not been updated since the last long-term plan, but they've factored in any new data that there is in terms of births and death trends, that sort of thing. And then when we work through the supply side with our growth model, we're looking at the information we've got from consents and pre-applications, and that sort of FDS information is feeding in quite a lot to that too.
Just through the chair, the other thing I was going to add was that I'll be preparing a big housing and business assessment this year, which will form part of our long-term plan. It's a bit like this report, but much, much bigger. And it will look over a longer time period. So we will then be able to see, I think, some clearer trends over the 10 years and things like that. But as Bradley's alluded to, we still have an obligation to make sure that we're meeting projections in the future, that we're providing enough capacity all the time. Yeah.
Other questions? A seconder. Deputy Mayor Bryant. So move Councillor Marling, second, and Deputy Mayor Bryant. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Okay, we move to item 8.7. Welcome, Katrina. So as Katrina makes her way here, I guess we've all read the news in terms of some of the metrics in that report, but certainly Councillor Hill wanted to pass on her thanks for especially looking in terms of the triage system you talked to her about and some of the mechanisms to address maybe some processes around doing that. But also I wanted to acknowledge that it's clear in terms of your report the issues that the department's facing with resourcing and staffing in terms of how we got there. But to find some time to see how you can get out of there with the same resources, both Councillor and myself wanted to acknowledge that at the front. So over to you.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, Katrina Lee here. This report probably doesn't be seen as enthusiasm that Rob can probably bring to the table here, but I'll try my best. So I'll take it as read most of the report, but I just want to probably outline, just summarise a few things that probably Brent's kind of started to allude to there, but very difficult to experienced staff. We've got 4 vacant positions all at that senior level, and there's doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, which is great. We're doing of contractors. I'd like to know that they're experienced. Some come and say they're senior, but don't necessarily become that process in that senior manner. But one thing we're talking actually with a council up north at the moment around how we can even, I've reached out to a number of councils around what they're doing with contractors and how we can improve that process, because I will give you the numbers. We're about 25 people actually helping us on the outside. Some of them may only 1 or 2 consents, but that's a number of people over 13 companies to be actually managing too, which is a real stretch for us to keep our BAU moving, and actually having someone managing those contracts, reviewing them, pushing at them is something that we're definitely recognising, and we're starting to look at ways we can actually, other parts of the council can support us with that process as well. So yeah, talking with another council up north at the moment around how a staff member in another council can support us. So that's probably a good way as well, around sharing those resources. Also, have increased our shared services around Nelson City Council. So we've set up a bit of more of a regular catch up with the resource consents manager there, and starting to audit each other's consents as well. So that'll start to bring some interesting, synergies between us, and also not just with Nelson, but Marlborough's going to be part of that group as well. So that's quite encouraging going forward. There's a lot of cumulative reasons over the time as well, with sicknesses and just more complex issues coming over our desk, which I know a number of councillors came to talk to myself or Kim around that as well. So that probably summarises that at this point. One thing that may assist going forward is the charge out rate in going up through the next fees and charges potentially may start to close that gap a bit, but that doesn't mean that the contractors are also going to raise theirs. So we're, once again, contract management is pretty important. So it's trying to find that support and resource to put it to that area.
Thank you. Questions? Deputy Mayor Bryant.
Hopefully I can stop coughing. Thank you for the report, Katrina. And it shows that it's continuing challenging times in the resource consent area. So do really appreciate the work you're doing there under challenging conditions. Is there any more as elected members, or even from a staff perspective, that we can do to help? Because obviously we can't get planners out of thin air. It's a worldwide show. We've talked about that many times. But have you thought about anything else that would help with the situation? Because every council in the country, if not the world, must be facing this problem.
Yeah, they're still facing it throughout the country for sure. I think it's the communication, keeping open and early on communicating with us, I think is really crucial. Whether there needs to be some sort of more regular, organised, structured kind of way of talking with you around what you're seeing in the community. I think early on communication is really important. I do generally have an open door policy and try and get to those things, try and get to those matters a bit, reasonably quickly as I can.
And I do see whether the number of duty planner type requests have dropped. And I think some of that is because people have sort of aware that we're overloaded and that it's going to take a long line, or even not looking to seek information, or just thinking, well, this is going to be too difficult to do, which is sad for us, because we may in some ways be encouraging people to do things without consent.
Yeah, and that puts pressure on our compliance team too.
Yes,
So obviously encourage them to
we
do
really
it right.
do as a trust organisation. How we help you. So
yeah, we've got one person really doing our duty planning at the moment, and especially our land use space, because that's where we see a lot of inquiries through, which is actually, we kind of go in peaks and troughs with that, and then we pull our duty plans in-house away from that and get them processing, because we, stat clock is actually a tertiary clock that's ticking and ticking.
Yeah.
And if we're not allocating, that's where we're seeing the real crunch, is when we don't allocate for 10, 20 days. It goes discount penalties.
I do get inquiries, and it hasn't even been allocated.
Yep. And that's finding. So that's where it comes in a little bit. What Brent was talking about, and I've talked to Chris and a couple others around the bit of a traffic light system, you may want to call it. So the red ones, where we know they're going to be complex, they come in the door, either going to be notified or just got some real complex or political media, kind of whatever it may be. And we say, look, those are pretty crucial that we need to prioritise to get them out, because those are the ones that, at the end of the day, cost-wise, are killing us, the discount penalties. So we're doing some work up on that front to try and get those really moving. Yes, it may sound like they're being brought to the top of the pile a little bit more, but those are the ones that, from a cost point of view and risk, that's what's really hurting us. But at the other end of the scale, with the green ones, where they're quite, tick box and kind of real, just small non-compliances, why can't we get those out through a streamlined decision approach, rather than doing a notification report, having someone sign off that, do a decision report, actually bringing that together as a combined notification decision report. A number of councils do this. This is kind of a hybrid approach, and get those out through the door, get them out quick. Then there's no risk. They're pretty just, as I say, a real.
It's a matter of prioritisation, just how you approach that issue. So certainly
the support around it, even getting the templates all sorted. There's it's a bit of a task, but we're getting there.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. First, I just want to acknowledge all the mahi that you're doing and the pressure that you and the team are under. It's not a good place to be, and I'm mindful of what your well-being is because of that. I just have one little question. Well, first of all, I really endorse the traffic light system. I think it's fantastic, and I hope you can get templates and other things done, and that you can implement that ASAP. The second, what I do have a question around is, so if you've received an application and it's been this big hikoi, so a big journey, and there's been discounts obviously had to be given because of penalties, because we haven't been able to deliver for numerous reasons. If that application is withdrawn, and then in a couple of months' time, whether the same party or another party presents an application on the same site, do they then start from scratch, or do we then have to pick up on where we were at with the mahi that's been done, and the timeframes around that, please?
Through the chair, they start from scratch. So the clock starts again. If they withdraw their application, then that's gone. But doesn't mean that all that work's gone in a way, because you've probably got a lot of background information depending on if the proposal's the same or slightly amended. We hope to also use the same planner depending on what's going on. The clock starts again. So we do have a clean slate as far as costs and clock, I suppose you could say. Clock. Yeah.
Councillor Manning.
Well, if the report does it need seconding?
Needs moving.
Well, I'll be happy to move. But Katrina, I'd just like to thank you for all the work that you've done. And when you read your report, you can actually see we're actually getting less appeals. So the work your staff are doing is obviously right up to scratch, and there are less disputes from that point of view. So that means that the training, particularly for your junior planners that you got, that you've taken graduates, they're obviously getting it right and they've been supervised well. So I think you need to be commended from that point of view. The fact that we have to give discounts and targeting the more complex ones sounds like you're on the right track. And if there is a slowdown, I'm sure some of these contractors will come looking for jobs if it ever does happen, because that's what's happened in the past. As soon as things are really tough, and you can see it in central government, they can earn double by going out doing contracting. And when it slows down, those contracting firms let people go rather quickly. So you never know, it may change over time, but there's some really good stuff in this report from you, and I thank you for it.
So if I've got this right, moved by Councillor Maylor, seconded by Councillor Butler. Any other discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Right, it moves us to the next one. Almost there. 8.8. Welcome, Jenny and Jamie. So temporary road closures, we're in your hands.
Good morning, councillors and chair. I just want to introduce again Jenny Thornborough. Some of you will have met her. So she's our new road safety coordinator. So picking up the work that Megan Bell and subsequently Melanie Ellis were doing. So this is Jenny's report, but I just want to pick up on climate change and emissions as a topic. I know it's come up in prior discussions. In our report, we've assessed in section 9, we've assessed the significance of this particular activity around temporary road closures, and particularly, I guess, the car rally event. We've assessed it as low significance, but I just thought it would be useful when we start looking at things through a climate and emissions lens you get some interesting results, shall we say. So using some approximate calculations, I've assessed if we use a proxy for emissions as vehicle kilometres travelled, it's about as good a proxy as we have. The car rally event as proposed might result in approximately 5,000 additional vehicle kilometres travelled. It's made up of the attendees to the event, travelling to and from the event, undertaking the rally itself, and also the vehicles that would be travelling on Kaiteri Sandy Bay Road, having to divert through Kaiteri Terry to get to Marahu. So just bear that number in mind, 5,000. By comparison, the Mapua Easter Fair, there's, I think, 10,000 attendees to that, about, just assuming 8,000 come from outside of Motueka and outside of Mapua, and travel a distance. You could round the vehicle kilometres travelled for those attendees to around 100,000. Another example is creation of rural residential dwellings, or in the rural 3 zone in particular. I think on average we've been approving about 30 new rural 3 lots each year. Using some assumptions, that generates about 500,000 additional vehicle kilometres travelled each year. So that's year on year just for that 30 lots. So there's some big numbers, and overall vehicle kilometres travelled on any given day on Tasman roads is about 1.6 million. So yeah, so the car rally event as proposed will add about 0.3% to the daily emissions. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me through that, and I'll leave it open to questions.
Thank you, Jamie. If we were going to have a discussion about it, I'm sure we're about to now. Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, I'd just like to move the report, thanks. And just a couple of comments. Yeah, everybody's worried about emissions. The government's just kicked the biofuels to touch. They've been approached by a new fuel, which is, the name's just gone out of my head at the moment, which is becoming available overseas. They're showing no interest in that at all either. It's a zero emission fuel.
And just recently, Hayden Pedden was in this area with his fully electric rally car doing a demonstration out at the Kahatu racetrack, promoting electric vehicles, both in competition and on the road. So the world is a moving object, and yeah, liquid ammonia is the new fuel that's been brought into play overseas.
Deputy Mayor Brian.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to second the resolutions. I think this is very much a procedural thing. It shouldn't take too long, one would think. Just have a question for Jamie or Jenny. So some of these events, you've got the times that are obviously quite a bit longer than the actual time that the road will be closed. So if it's shorter, they'll be opened up as quickly as possible. And in that longer time, there'll be marshals to clear the traffic wanting to go through the area as well, will there, by and large, particularly the larger events I'm thinking about?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you. Yes, we will have traffic management on all of those sites, and the likes of the stopping distance demonstration. In the application, it's for the full day. Excuse me, but once we've worked out with the school what time we'll do that stopping distance, might only be 40 minutes that the road's closed for.
Yeah. And just a follow-up question. So in time, once we get to the new speed management plan, Jamie, if we ever do get there, for you, Mr. Chairman, these will become procedural things through that process, won't they, rather than having a debate, discussion?
I mean, the speed management plan through Mr. Chair is probably a separate issue from these temporary road closures. I'm not aware of any changes to the legislation that covers this, which is the Local Government Act and the heavy vehicle the motor vehicle regulations. So yeah, unfortunately, I think we're still going to have this procedural resolution.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, thank you for your explanation around that car rally event. My question is more around the impact that it has on our environment when we run Muddy Buddies as opposed to that said car event. I know that we've talked about this previously and it went nowhere, but I just want to raise, I'd quite like to know how they mitigate the damages that are done through their event. Thank you.
Yeah, it's true, Mr. Chair. It's probably not one that we can answer. I mean, yeah, it's probably more of a regulatory district plan type question. So what we're bringing to you is just the proposed temporary road closure. So yeah, apologies that I can't answer that.
Not sure if Mr. Drummond or anyone else is in a position. He doesn't seem to be.
Thank you. I just find it interesting that you opened the first statement around the 0.3% of what it would be to have those vehicles, but we don't get any balanced material around this other event. Just to be noted, thank you.
Councillor Butler may be up to assist, then we'll come to Councillor Roth.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Walker, Trevor James was asked specifically about this when he gave a report about the estuary, that particular estuary, and his comment was that it wasn't considered to be of damage particularly. He was okay with it, so, which I was surprising, but yeah, that was from the scientist. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Jenny, did you want to add?
Sorry, yes, just through the chair, when I spoke to the organisers of Muddy Buddy yesterday about participant numbers and traffic, they did say they had regulatory for 1,400 competitors for that event. Resource consent, sorry, yeah.
Councillor Commonwealth.
Jamie, or through the chair, Jamie and Mr. Drummond, thank you very much for all your communications prior to this meeting. I give up. I say that because I was looking at not from a transport perspective, I was looking at it from an environmental perspective, and something that we as a council could do when we're considering these road closures of the effect on the environment, not necessarily the amount of road traffic it's going to generate. I was thinking of sending a signal to the people who come along here and say that we're going to do this, that they have got to respect the environment, and some or other they've got to say, well, yes, the impact is very low, moderate, whatever. And the 0.3% I take on board, so it's that much of effect overall. But would still like the council to consider, when we're approving things, that we look more holistically at the environment and what's happening to that when we're approving the road closures and having an event. I'm not against events. I'm actually not a petrol head, but I enjoy motorsport. So it's the environment where I'm coming from. So I'll rest my case there, and I'll try and bring the environmental aspects up at a later meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure there was a question, but I guess my question to Mr. Drummond or Jamie is just reinforcing that this isn't the judgment about the environmental effects. This is a process to close a road. So in terms of if Muddy Buddy has resource consent, then there's been a process through that. So I just want to distinguish the two around road closure and I guess assessment of a wider event. I think we're talking two different mechanisms. But
yeah, well, I think that all these mechanisms are connected. Of course, there's a purpose why there's process to go through to get to a particular outcome. But I think the genuine challenge of climate change and the national reduction approach that is brought to that, the regional response to that, inevitably these things are going to have to touch. And I think it's the national direction is steering us towards, for instance, the inevitability that we're going to have to develop vehicle reduction plans. But there's a time frame for that, because I don't think our community at the moment is geared up for having that a very abrupt conversation. So there's a lot of things in the pipeline that are coming that will bring these things together. But I can certainly appreciate your concern that right now things seem a bit dislocated because process are not actually giving a heavy weighting to the considerations that you're bringing to the table. So again, it's a matter of progress, because right now we probably don't have the processes that bring those things into play. But that's where we're heading, and inevitably these things have to become part of a wider discussion. We don't ask folk who are seeking authorisations at this point in time to go through such a sort of a double-ended process or double-sided process. I think it is a deficiency, and I think as a nation we're working towards a better way of dealing with these things.
thank you. So we have a move by Councillor Dowler, seconded by Deputy Mayor Bryan. Did you want to write a reply, Councillor Dowler, or just happy to put the motion? So I put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Homeward bound. Kevin, item 8.9. I think this is the first time I've read an exchange of uniform road reports. So welcome. We're in your hands.
Okay, good morning. I'll take it through the chair that the report is read. Thank you to those people who have submitted some questions in regards to this. I realise some people it's their first time seeing a road stopping report. Yeah, this process, there's a subdivision consent process going on separately to this, but this decision is purely based on council being the manager of the roads saying, can the landowner move the road 20 metres to the west inside their property so they can form their subdivision, and obviously it's for their better return. The applicant meets all the costs involved, so there's no cost to council. They're paying for my time to prepare the report, to attend here and to do all the correspondence. You don't see too many of these because the process is quite expensive for the applicant by the time they get professional fees, surveyors, valuations, and an accredited agent to write reports to LINZ and LINZ fees. So yeah, you'll probably see one or two of these a year at the most.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Bryan. Deputy Mayor Bryan, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to move the resolution. As Kevin's alluded, it's a very straightforward manner and also very costly for the applicant. And in this case, it's only shifting it. In fact, it is only 20 metres, isn't it? So there's really no change to the environmental effect. It helps the developer. And I have looked into this for other people, road stopping, and here it's a long and it can be a long and time consuming process as well as costly. So I see no reason why we wouldn't allow it in this case. So I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Oh, now I've been promoted.
Councillor Diallo.
Yeah, I'm happy to second.
So we have a mover and second. Councillor Kinmoth.
Thank you for your responses to me. It was brilliant. I still have a concern that the road subdivision stops 50 metres short of the Upper Mercury Highway. And that unless there's a bloody good barrier there, sorry, a sturdy barrier, people will come down the hill through the track out onto the road. Am I second guessing things here?
Sorry, through the chair. I think the subdivision is quite a way away from the Mootree. And my understanding is that the first stage, the requirement is for all traffic has to go back through Red Vale onto Maisie's Road, and then they can go on to the Mootree or Coastal Highway. As I say, the decisions about access and traffic flow will all be part of the subdivision consent process. But no, we're not close to the Mootree Highway because I think there's a few properties in between, or at least one. And yeah, my understanding is that traffic.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether or not this shifting of the road, which is what it is really, it's just shifting road, is this going to open up the possibility for the developer to put houses on a ridgeline, which I understand is, and it, you know, that does the TRMP does address that issue of houses on the ridgeline, but looking at the map, it looks like that's what it might be.
It appears it's certainly making for more favourable building sites that are at a slightly higher elevation, but I'm not 100% sure if it's right on the ridgeline, but yes, it is the benefit of the development.
No, that's what I thought.
Katrina. So this hopefully will answer the conversation. Thanks, Katrina.
I just want to clarify if it's an identified ridgeline, because we have not all ridgelines in the actual planning map. So if identified, then there's rules associated with the height of that. Not the best earthworks rules around that, to be honest. So you can clear quite a bit of an identified ridgeline as a permit activity. It's a TRMP matter. But yeah, I'm not too sure of the site whether it's identified as such, but if it is, then it's got control rules around that.
Thank you. You continue your microphone. Might be another question. Do you have a question, Councillor?
Oh, no, that's a well trained speaker.
I have to check that. I don't.
Overall free so that they would build on bridge lines.
Yeah, and that'll be part of the overall design of the subdivision layout. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so we have a mover, we have a seconder, so we've moved Deputy Mayor Brian, seconded by Councillor Dowler. Any other discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, you've been so nice to me, and before I ask Mr Drummond to close, thank you to Councillor Ellis who hasn't kicked me yet, so.
Still doing it.
So thank you all.
Thank you to the chair. Before I do close with the karakia, I just want to acknowledge the, I guess, the different dynamics of the committee today. It is our first trial to sew these concepts of environment and regulation together. I want to thank you for your engagement, because my sense is that it did create a much more free-flowing discussion. And the other aspect that I really appreciated about it was that it's bringing different parts of the council together to tell the certain aspects that are under scrutiny. So it's hopefully taking us more and highlighting more that as a council we are very keen on connecting our people up across groups. And I think that's the strength of the Environment and Regulatory Committee. It's a cross-group thing. And so what you're hearing is all aspects of the discussion rather than parts of the discussion. So any feedback that you're able to provide us about how we can improve this engagement further, most happy to take that on board, but yes, certainly thank you for your engagement today in the respect you've given the speakers, and there were some really good presentations here. So with that, I'll give a closing karakia. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mātou o mātou hoa o mātou whānau katoa. Aio ki te arangi e tau mai ana. So our work here is finished. Grasshoppers, quite relevant given one of the presentations today. Looking after ourselves, all our friends and family, peace is in the universe has settled upon us.
Thank you all.